It's easier for the very privileged, wealthy, and powerful, particularly the young and healthy among them, but also the older, sometimes wiser, at least more experienced, to believe that there's a mystical benevolence, that no matter which way the wind blows, fortune can and will smile upon those who are deserving, than it is for poor people on the down and out, largely charitable and hardworking, to just presume that disastrous decisions won't have spiritual consequences. So instead of putting their hopes, valor, and investments in bloating their good fortune, chasing rainbows for gold that they've known to be found before, they put our hopes in public safety nets, worldwide ideas of welfare, understanding poverty, and appropriate mitigation and adaptation, not maladaptive convictions based in dogma, producing only isolated super privilege. This isn't an issue of class. The Democratic Party pulled a sleight of hand in the election of 2024. Sleight of hand organized the idea that there's an echelon of privilege, that people belong in certain echelons of privilege if they're loyal to the state apparatus and eligible to apply by draw of birth. This echelon of class seems to be arguing that there is a lower class at stake, a working class, a group of organized churches, Catholic social work, that is at risk if we make bad decisions with public policy consequences to our environment, to our inflation rate, to our wage earning ability. And throughout their presentation, they regard as untouchable the albatross of undiagnosed profligacy for warfare that nobody wants except those who make money from it. So what we should try to do as a human species is to put our hopes in demanding that the empire understand the need to use our intellectual resources and distribution of labor, our planning skills, and our imperial genius, if you will, towards sustaining a movement out of poverty, towards safety nets that are adaptive to changing climate circumstances, to distribution which is fair and not costly to the ability to continue producing. It's not really an act of magic to invest in things that already exist by active preservation, such as forests wetlands, soils, wilderness, other species, marshlands, peat bogs. These are the sort of things that already exist. They are treasures to our lifeline. We have cultural supremacy ideas that need to be directed to more suitable, balanced sense of proportion. A person who believes that they are selected to be a crusader in a given department of society needs to understand that the people around him may feel the same way, meaning that the idea isn't to change them, but to sufficiently adapt to one another that we can get along despite our differences. There's a general fixation on the ability to fight that Putin exploits among other people, which has to be legally contained so that it never involves unwilling participants, so it never targets bystanders, so that when boxing matches do occur, both men understand the consequences to each other and the fact that some of us see it as abnormal behavior. This is something that identifies our condition as searching for a way out of catastrophe through comprehensive study of culture and circumstance. It's important to understand that people born into unfortunate circumstances are not put there as an act of karma. That's false consciousness. They're put there by acts of prior decisions made by people with whom they may have had nothing whatsoever in common. They are victims of circumstance, but they are not, therefore, to be abandoned. We need to understand poverty. We need to understand climate migration, and there are people who do understand. There are leaders in Africa who have seen migration before. The idea of migration is not a thing to be feared. It is a thing to be embraced intelligently so that the ebb and flow of migrations are done in such a way that people survive them with their health and their promise intact. People have often said, somebody put a note up about my comment of Elbridge that I said he talks like an electric fence. I don't trust the man who talks like that. If you talk that fast, you're not prepared. I'm not sure that's true about Elbridge. He seemed very well prepared. He had one half sentence, but who doesn't? Anyway, I probably won't be able to recapture my thought, but when you put it into perspective, what you realize is that identifying people who are experienced is helpful in expediting inquiry and directing action. Let me give you an example. Suppose I'm 14 years old and I conceptualize the question, how can elderly people escape floodplains in an emergency when they can't climb stairs? So you look into people who engineer ramps out of floodplains, and you investigate, is there anybody in flood-stricken areas who have experience with building ramps for the elderly? And if you find someone who has that experience, you make known that this person has experience and expertise in building ramps out of floodplains for the trapped elderly. This is just an example, but there's a process involved. Identifying a potential act of improvement, identifying somebody who may have experience in that area, and finding a way to contact them and find suitable funding for that in contingency that is rational if flooding is expected and they have a problem of endangered seniors. This is one example. There's countless examples that involve things like climate resilient shade structures. We've all seen the images, I assume most of it at least, have seen the images of cows fighting for space under a tree in the scorching suns of the drought. There's potentially an industry involved in the creation and distribution and maintenance of climate resilient shade structures, which can be used in intervals when the scorching sun arises. We're dealing with an overhot planet. The potential to invest brilliance in making the world great for once, for the first time, making the world flourish for the first time, comes from the promise of understanding each other's condition and circumstances that is now possible with telecommunications. Investing in the dinosaurs of the past to assuage the ego problems of established arsenals of pre-existing arrangements is a mistake. We mustn't cultivate our egos that way. We should look at our successes and failures as attempts to bring about prosperity, whether for the few or for the many. The idea of prosperity, rather than purposefully creating hell on earth, is somewhat universal. People say that the Russians are coming, for example. There's certain admirable characteristics to the Russians. That most of these people, most of these men in China want to prosper. They believe in a win-win situation as possible. And we must look for people like that and encourage them, not diminish them. We must look in ourselves. Why are we out to play zero-sum games? Why are we out to create hell on earth for other people? We mustn't allow that to go unquestioned. So when we look for understanding about population trends, it's one of the great boogie monsters. But we're not at the point where population requires genocide. If we investigate poverty and how it operates, we will never be at the point where we have to mitigate population by genocide, because we will be adaptive. People who have a safety net are less procreative. It seems counterintuitive. It seems that as soon as you prosper, you want to make love. But that's not what happens in underprivileged areas. People have children because that's their only certain investment and support. And child death rates are very high. Child mortality goes down, so you don't have to have so many children when you have safety nets. This is just one example. The problem is that people are told not to ask questions, seek answers, and have faith that you can find the expertise that exists and the experience that exists, when in fact it is out there. People who seek to resolve the issues are far more likely to accomplish issue resolutions than those who are squelched, who are told no, who are told it can't be done, who are filled with cynicism and pessimism and hatred and often self-hatred. These kinds of things need to be resolved as an act of politics. They have to be resolved as a dialogue in Congress. The Democrats refused to do that. They decided they wanted an echelon of privileged prosperity, and they were going to sell that against the idea of a mystical faith in super riches.